And the place went insane.
Trying to be professional about this, but my job is to be a professional.
You know, Joe, you're fine. Cassandra Basler?
Cassandra.
Cassandra
Yeah.
Basler.
Mm-hmm.
Cassandra.
It's Friday, April 3rd, and you're listening to Uptown Radio. I'm Ariel Richens.
And I'm Charlotte Gibson. 2 weeks ago, a malfunctioning hot plate caused a fire in Brooklyn that killed 7 Orthodox Jewish children. Tonight is the beginning of Passover, a holiday when observant Jews will need those hot plates, so the community is taking extra precautions.
I changed my smoke detector battery 2 nights ago, as soon as I heard the beep go.
Subway fares went up again last week. Traveling to work and back now costs commuters more than $5 a day. Some of them wish higher fares meant better service.
We think things will get better, but they charge us more but don't increase anything for us.
And members of the Episcopal Church want it to do for climate change what religions have done for other causes.
They were absolutely crucial in the civil rights movement, and I think here we have that same opportunity.
But first, this news.
From NPR News in Washington, I'm Nancy Lyons. After a disappointing jobs report, President Obama says the U.S. has to be relentless in its efforts to grow the economy. NPR's Scott Horsley reports American employers added just 126,000 jobs in March.
Last month's job gains fell far short of what many analysts had expected. Job growth in January and February was revised downwards as well. Extreme winter weather may have temporarily depressed hiring in some industries, but President Obama says the U.S. is also feeling the effects of a global economic slowdown.
Europe has had a weaker economy. Asia has been slowing down. We have had the strongest economy, but we're impacted by what happens around the world.
Obama says the government has to do its part in shoring up the economy, including investments in public works projects and workforce training. Scott Horsley, NPR News, the White House.
Wall Street is closed today. Iran's president says yesterday's announcement about a framework for a nuclear deal is just the first step toward improving relations with the rest of the world. President Hassan Rouhani, speaking through an interpreter, says his country will honor the agreement.
We do not intend to cheat. We will keep our promises. Of course, promises
within the framework of our national interests, and we will honor these pledges, provided that the other side honors their promises as well.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Iran cannot be trusted. But President Obama says the U.S. would not sign on to any agreement that would threaten Israel. In southwestern Yemen, fierce battles rage on in the port city of Aden, where fighters allied with the country's president tried to stave off advances by Iran-backed Houthi rebels. NPR's Leila Fadel reports Saudi warplanes also dropped crates of arms supplies to fighters battling the Houthis.
Despite Saudi-led airstrikes, Houthi Shia fighters continue to make advances into the country's south and west. The fighting in the port city of Aden is particularly horrific. Houthis, with their military allies, paraded into the center of the city and briefly took control of the presidential residence on Wednesday. Residents described bodies in the streets and tanks firing into homes. The Houthis were pushed back from the presidential residence following airstrikes in the neighborhood, residents say, but clashes continue. Meanwhile, the extremist Sunni group Al-Qaeda seems emboldened. The group continues to seize government buildings in a city in southeastern Yemen. Leila Fadel, NPR News, Cairo.
China is reportedly helping other countries evacuate their people from strife-torn Yemen. China's foreign minister says one of the country's naval frigates has evacuated 225 foreign citizens after being asked to help. It's the first time China's military has helped other countries evacuate. This is NPR.
This is WNYC in New York. I'm Richard Hake.
From Columbia Radio News in New York, this is Anjali Sastry. A 50-year-old man appears to have been killed and 2 people injured after a Long Island fire in the town of Roosevelt destroyed a home early Friday morning. Fire officials say the cause of the fire appears to have been an overloaded electrical connection. Officials say there were no smoke detectors in the house. There were 10 adult occupants, but no children. Allies of New Jersey Senator Robert Menendez have launched a social media campaign to help him fight federal corruption charges. Menendez pleaded not guilty yesterday to accepting nearly $1 million in gifts and campaign donations in exchange for political favors. Menendez was released without bail and is tentatively set to appear in court July 13th. There was a possible security breach at a Kennedy Airport checkpoint early this morning. TSA workers pursued a suspected truck thief as he ran through the airport. He was then restrained by a pilot. The area has now been declared safe. Hillary Clinton's campaign headquarters may be heading to Brooklyn. A source close to the campaign said Clinton signed a lease today for 2 floors in a Brooklyn Heights building. Clinton is expected to announce her plans to run for president soon. A federal appeals court will not reconsider a ruling that appeared to narrow the definition of insider trading. The Second U.S. Court of Appeals issued a 1-paragraph ruling today, turning down a petition from the U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara to reevaluate a December court ruling on insider trading. Observers say this ruling will negatively impact prosecutors' ability to pursue insider trading cases. A Philadelphia woman was arrested today on charges that she planned to help the self-declared Islamic State group. This follows the arrest and charge yesterday of 2 women living in Queens in a plot to build a homemade bomb and using it for a Boston Marathon-type attack. The 2 women appeared in court Thursday afternoon and were held without bail. A partial lunar eclipse will be visible from the city starting at 5 tomorrow morning. Highs into the 60s for the holiday weekend with heavy showers for the rest of the tonight in New York. Anjali Sastry, Columbia Radio News.
After 2 years of negotiations, the United States, along with 6 other leading nations, have finally reached a framework agreement with Iran for the country's nuclear program.
President Barack Obama commented on the progress yesterday. He said that now Iran will face more inspections than any other country.
If Iran cheats, the world will know it.
The deal won't be finalized until the end of June, when negotiators work out the key details for final agreement. The program plans to restrict Iran's nuclear capabilities for the next decade.
If Iran breaches the terms, Obama says the country could face unprecedented sanctions. But he said this agreement should peacefully resolve one of the greatest threats to our security.
Some are calling the framework a major achievement of the president's foreign policy, and Obama says the breakthrough could help reunite Iran with the world.
It demonstrates that if Iran complies with its international obligations, then it can fully rejoin the community of nations, thereby fulfilling the extraordinary talent and aspirations of the Iranian people. That would be good for Iran, and it would be good for the world.
In Iran, this news has been met with widespread celebration. And for some Iranian Americans, the news is even more momentous. I visited Iranian-American novelist Porchista Kakpour this morning. In her Harlem apartment, I asked her about her initial reaction on Twitter.
If you look at it in the context of the news and in terms of what's happening in the Middle East and has been happening in our endless post-9/11 era, this is like the greatest progress one could hope for, possibly.
What is the narrative that we're missing in this, or is there a narrative?
I think there is. One often has to say, remember the character of Iranian people. I could see how that's problematic in a sense, but for a lot of us, even under the idea of the Islamic Republic of Iran, we know Iranians to be actually fairly secular, even at the top. We have a country here that has a proper separation of church and state. And you see this on Twitter yesterday with the reaction of Iranians on social media taking selfies with Obama on television, which they could see, for the first time.
And that was a major moment. What is your reaction to the social media presence?
For me, Twitter is actually a great reflection at times of the people, So often Americans roll their eyes at it, but I think it's a symptom of American luxury. The outcry you saw in Iran was not manipulated, wasn't branded. Our neoconservatives, and of course Netanyahu and his government would like to spin it that this is not what the Iranian people want. That's a fallacy, and this is what we saw last night with the celebrations that were going on last night, all on the streets of Tehran and all over the country. And they're very much more like us, peace-loving human beings who like to celebrate.
In your opinion, what are the next steps for this progress? Because this is just the start, essentially.
I think in the end, there's a level to which we're all powerless and all that, and then there are people at the top who make certain decisions, and anything can happen. If we have, imagine in the U.S. if we had another major terrorist attack, all these things can go. These things can leave us. We've seen this now. However, the one thing we can control is our attitudes towards this and being educated. And this really does require optimism and education and goodwill. And so I think even in these 6 months, if I could think like a professor a little bit and tell Americans that they have homework, and I mean by Americans, I mean Iranians and Americans, Iranian Americans, all the entire globe essentially, is to be a little bit educated about who Iranians are, what they want, what this means for them.
If you could kind of encapsulate this in one sentence, what it means for you.
I think the emotional responses for me are relief, hope, gratitude, joy. The fact that different parts of my own identity can now potentially coexist is huge, that I could actually now offer something to the country where I was born that I haven't been back in since I was 4, that I can do that with a level of ease and good conscience. The relief, the joy, the optimism, the gratitude, I think is essential for everyone involved too.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point, and that's a wonderful place to end. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.
Kakpour is an award-winning Iranian-American novelist who wrote Suns and Other Flammable Objects and The Last Illusionist. On any given day, there are about 4,000 inmates in solitary confinement in New York State, and people can be kept there for years.
The United Nations says any time in solitary beyond 15 days is torture. And the Vera Institute, a justice policy nonprofit, says it's just inhumane.
As my co-host Ariel Richin reports, the Institute is launching a new initiative to reduce solitary confinement use in New York City.
On 163rd Street in the Bronx, 5 Mulim Ak is opening the door to his studio apartment.
This is my humble abode.
It's really small.
No matter how much you change it up, in my mind, it'll still be the measurements of a cell,
In 1999, Mulim Ak was sentenced to 32 years for tax evasion, drug trafficking, extortion, and weapons possession. He served 12 years and spent almost half of his time, 6 years,
over 49,000 hours,
in solitary confinement. In New York, when a corrections officer thinks you should be punished, you get something called a ticket. He got a lot of tickets for things that seem like pretty small-time stuff. Possessions of sharp weapons, his drawing pencils, hoarding materials, extra stamps, and misappropriating resources, sharing dinner, even cutting his hand on a food tray.
It was destruction of state property because I cut myself on state property.
In solitary, the idea is total deprivation. He wasn't allowed any visitors, not even photos on the wall. Today, though, his apartment is full of stuff. It's messy, but he knows exactly where his most valuable possessions are. He takes out a worn envelope.
This is one of the portraits I did.
To cope, he spent hours drawing on the 2 sheets of paper he got each month. People he met, people he missed.
I knew when I was in prison I had a daughter, but I never seen her. I didn't know what she looked like. And that was one of my estimates of what my daughter would look like.
He knew the cracks on the wall of his cell, even numbered them. A single bulb hung from the ceiling like an eternal sun.
The light has been on for so long, humming, like zzz, toilet dripping, wind under the door. All these things are attacking me, and you can't turn them off, right? They're on all the time.
As far as Scott Paltrowitz from the Corrections Association of New York is concerned, this is inhumane. It's nothing short of torture.
You know the consequences that people psychologically and behaviorally will deteriorate in solitary.
So they act out more. They get more tickets, more time in solitary. What's worse, Paltrowitz says, is that
the vast majority of people are there for nonviolent conduct.
5 out of 6 people start out in there for nonviolent offenses, according to a recent report by the NYCLU. Christine Herman is the head of the Vera Institute's Segregation Reduction Project. She says solitary confinement is so extreme, it should be a last resort. The problem is it's become a default.
Answer to every little infraction, whether it be 2 extra postage stamps or, stabbing someone, is the same. It's throwing them in the shoe.
Her group is leading the effort to curb the use of solitary confinement. First step is spending time in jails to find out
answers to questions like who is in segregation, how they get there, how long they stay.
For the next 14 months, they'll build a database and share it with the public, then make policy recommendations. And that conversation has already started. Mayor Bill de Blasio last month banned the use of solitary for inmates under 22. But opposition comes from the guards in the prison. They say they need a strong punishment like solitary to keep order. The union that represents corrections officers didn't return my calls. They released this video featuring Michael Powers, the union president, after New York State closed 4 prisons and cut back on solitary confinement units last month.
Prisoners have significantly less incentive to obey officers or civilian staff. The result is that our prisons are as dangerous as ever, and this could have been prevented.
Back in his apartment, Mulim Ak tells me the thing that saved him is he got out, like out. He remembers the day corrections officers were banging on his cell.
You won't believe this. You know how you've been crying about how you're innocent? Well, turns out you were right.
His conviction on 3 of 4 counts had been overturned.
We're, letting you out. Here's $40 and a bus ticket. Make it.
Next stop, 42nd Street. The bus dropped him off during rush hour. In one day, he went from a 6x9 cell to Times Square. He walked toward the sidewalk.
And I'm so used to stopping at yellow lines in prison that I automatically just stood there.
Mulim Ak didn't make it much farther. He had a panic attack, went to the hospital, missed parole. He ended up back in jail where he still owed time in solitary. When he finally got out for good, he lived on the streets for 2 years. He was alone.
All my friends and people I know are still in cages.
But he's not. Since he got out 3 years ago, he's been fighting for those who are still inside. He lives with his son Shaquille, who's also joined the cause. Sitting at a child-sized desk, Mulim Ak shows me a video called Children of the Incarcerated.
What I do is I try to open awareness to youth about, the pitfalls and traps that are set up for us.
Mulim Ak beams. Both of them are fighting to ban solitary from the 6x9 bedroom they share in the Bronx. Ariel Richin, Columbia Radio News.
The Bureau of Labor Statistics released the March jobs report this morning, revealing a slowdown in hiring compared to recent months.
The good news is hourly earnings rose slightly, beating expectations. Today, Miriam Sitz started her morning at a restaurant in Harlem to see how jobs report numbers play out in real life. She went to McDonald's on 125th and Broadway.
Lydia Dominga Cabrera is 19. She works under the Golden Arches, training employees and working her way up in the restaurant's management.
The crew training right now, but I'm practicing for being a manager.
And there are people for her to train. The restaurant's hiring. She works about 40 hours a week.
Full-time right now.
Full-time. How much are 40 hours a week?
40 hours a week.
Making just about minimum wage.
$8.75, $9, around there.
McDonald's announced on Wednesday that this summer it would raise its starting wage to $1 above the federal minimum. I asked Cabrera what an extra $40 a month would do for her.
Well, that will help my son a lot. Because right now my mom is not working, and I'm like the one who's doing everything. You know?
An extra $40 would help a lot, she says. It would make a real difference to the young woman who financially supports her mother. But there's a catch. The McDonald's wage increase only applies to 10% of stores, not ones owned by franchisees, like the location where Cabrera works. Still, according to information from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, workers in the fast food and hospitality industries are seeing wage increases more quickly than the rest of the labor market. Martin Coley is the chief regional economist for the Bureau of Labor Statistics.
The average weekly wage in the industry was $14.23 in March, and that's actually up about 3.6% over the year.
That looks pretty good compared to average wage growth of 2.1%.
But it's still an industry that pays well below the average for the total private sector, which is $24.86 an hour.
And despite the fact that the 125th Street McDonald's is hiring, many others aren't.
The most important thing for people to understand is that the pace of hiring slowed in a number of different industries.
And one of those industries where the pace of hiring slowed? Restaurants.
Employment and food services, which had been growing about 33,000 a month, actually increased only about 9,000 a month in March, so that's a significant slowdown.
Now, the jobs report doesn't specifically address minimum wage jobs, but
it does talk about industries in which you find a lot of minimum wage workers, like food services, and it is telling you that there are some wage increases going on, but it's also indicating that across all industries, wage increases continue to be historically low and small.
While only a small number of McDonald's employees can expect to see the July 1st pay increase, all minimum wage workers in New York can at least count on a state-mandated raise at the end of this year, a whole 25 cents. Miriam Sitz, Columbia Radio News.
Episcopal churches across the country are participating in a 30-day environmental awareness plan. This includes email notices and calls for action.
Some congregants are taking advantage of the moment to push their churches to pull investments out of fossil fuels. Paula Lem reports.
Stephanie Johnson is the pastor of St. Paul's Church in Fairfield, Connecticut. Johnson is sitting on a bench on the Yale campus surrounded by science labs. She's reading her sermon for this Sunday's Easter Vigil aloud for the first time. It talks about the Paschal candle, a symbol of Christ and of purity. But Johnson's message is about the environment.
I began to imagine, what if we take the Paschal candle out of the dark and closed sanctuary to the ocean where rising waters caused by climate change threaten the lives, homes, and livelihoods of millions upon millions?
A lot of Episcopalians may be hearing sermons like that as the church nears the end of its month-long action to address climate change. But Johnson wants the church to practice what it preaches. She wants it to wield its $12 billion of investment muscle by putting any of it that's in fossil fuels into green energy. It's a conversation she says has been percolating for a while, one that bishops are now considering. She says the vote would be a no-brainer. Johnson hopes they'll take a stand
and say, we will no longer invest our future, invest our time and our monies, and take a stake in an industry that is immoral.
Mary Evelyn Tucker is co-director of the Forum on Religion and Ecology at Yale. According to Tucker, a move like that would send a message to other denominations.
The institutional power, the investment resources of many of these churches are substantial. And they can make a statement of how is our future going to be a just and flourishing future.
But, relatively speaking, Episcopalians are just a drop in the bucket. There are about 2 million of them in the United States compared to roughly 80 million Catholics and 90 million evangelicals.
That's why I think that we've seen environmentalism really never take off as a substantial movement in the United States.
Darren Shirkett is a sociologist who teaches about religion and society at Southern Illinois University. He says it comes down to the numbers, and those 2 million Episcopalians aren't necessarily inclined to do what the church wants.
And that's a problem of control within liberal Protestantism. That's what it means to be liberal, is you let people do whatever they want to do. And that can include going with the money rather than going with the morals.
And when the moral choice is more expensive,
that's going to be a tough sell for most people, especially when you cut across the rest of cultural factors in the United States. That we have no mass transportation. We have a culture of individual automobiles.
According to Shirkett, it's far easier for people to give to charity than to support the environment.
Carbon tax credits are not very exciting. Feeding the poor, Jesus said that, right? Jesus said nothing about carbon tax credits.
Shirkett says he doubts that religion alone can fix climate change. But Yale's Mary Evelyn Tucker says religions have shown they're capable of making a difference.
Religious communities in particular have this moral possibility of change. They were absolutely crucial in the civil rights movement, and I think here we have that same opportunity.
The Episcopal bishops are expected to vote on the proposal in June. Paula Lem, Columbia Radio News.
Passover starts tonight. The week-long Jewish holiday celebrates the story of Moses. As it goes, he liberated the Jewish slaves from Egypt and received the Torah from God.
But Midwood, Brooklyn is still reeling after 7 children from the Sassoon family were killed in a fire 2 weeks ago. The fire was caused by a malfunctioning hot plate left on overnight. Observant Jewish families don't use electronics on the Sabbath, so hot plates and automatic light timers are essential.
Anjali Sastry reports that as the community prepares for Passover, there's debate about how to put safety first in a way that doesn't compromise religious practice.
The East Midwood Jewish Center on Ocean Avenue and Avenue J is just a few blocks from where the Sassoon family lived. Passover traditions are currently underway at the center.
And then set the candles up, okay?
Audrey Korlstein is the center's director of youth and family education. She's helping 2 7th grade girls light candles for a pre-Seder dinner to celebrate Passover with families a few days early.
I'm just going to light them tonight. We're going to say a prayer, a blessing.
Audrey asks one of the girls to light a match.
Are you allowed to light matches?
Probably, but I've never done it.
You've never lit a match?
I would rather not.
Okay, well, I were to teach you that. Just be careful, right?
There's more concern about fire safety this year. 2 weeks ago, 7 children died in a tragic house fire during the Sabbath. The dinner tonight is practiced before Passover to get the community together. With the loss of the Sassoons still on people's minds, the theme of this dinner is bereavement, says Center Rabbi Matt Carl.
It's around times of holidays that we're more acutely aware of who's not with us anymore.
The recent fire was caused by a faulty hot plate. The Sassoons were modern Orthodox and are forbidden from using electricity during the Sabbath. So they used hot plates to keep food warm. But Carl says people have been making way too much about the religious aspect of the hot plate being left on.
I noticed that in the newspaper it said that this had been the most deadly fire since the last one was, which was started by a space heater. And I remember thinking to myself at the time, well, no one says, oh, those so-and-so people, how come they have a space heater?
Still, Carl feels a responsibility as a rabbi to teach fire safety.
In the Orthodox world, there tends to be a greater desire to have Jewish organizations and Jewish leaders do things.
While Passover preparations take place at Carl's synagogue, Red Cross volunteers are going door to door with the fire department installing smoke detectors. Volunteer Ashley DeLuca says she was shocked when one family didn't have any of them.
They had 5 children, and they had, besides their basement, they had 3 floors in their house. So they had a lot of space and a lot of children. They had a lot of things to worry about, and they actually didn't have any smoke alarms at all.
I changed my smoke detector battery 2 nights ago as soon as I heard the beep go.
That's Midwood resident Joel Brown. She's taking extra precautions with Passover coming up.
I use hot plates, and I will not be using them overnight.
Brown knew the Sassoon family. She drove one of their boys home from school with her own children in February. As soon as she heard about the tragedy, she went over fire safety with her own kids.
They know the fire safety protocol. We have a porch, and the porches connect to other houses, and they know that, God forbid, if there's a fire, to run out to the porch and skip over the gates to the next houses.
Far from Midwood on the Upper West Side, Rabbi Moshe Grusko of the congregation Ramat Orah also has fire safety on his mind. Bread traditionally isn't eaten on Passover and is burned by families. But Grusko sent an email recommending members not burn bread.
It's a nice traditional custom to burn it, but that's symbolic. And if it's going to be unsafe or if it's going to be illegal to start a fire where you are, it's much better to just throw it in the garbage.
Whether it's during the Sabbath or not, the fire has brought awareness for Grusko.
It's a time to confess sin. I did not have batteries in my smoke detector before this happened, It was kind of hanging awkwardly off my ceiling, like detached from the last time I changed the battery a few months ago. And this inspired me, like, okay, I better change the batteries. I mean, little things like that. If it inspired other people like that, it'll save lives.
Passover begins at sundown tonight. Anjali Sastry, Columbia Radio News.
We know tonight is Passover because it's the 15th of the month.
Wait, Ariel, isn't today the 3rd?
No, Charlotte, it's the 15th on the Jewish calendar.
Okay, I get it.
For commentator Chava Gurari, living with the secular and Jewish calendars is like living in 2 time zones at once.
My brother Chaim is something of a calendar savant. Give him any date, and he'll tell you on what day of the week it'll fall, but only on the Jewish calendar. It's a great party trick, especially if you grew up as we did, in a Hasidic community in a suburb of Detroit. My brother and I are 2 of 9 siblings. In our world, there was only one calendar, one timeline. We celebrated our Jewish birthdays, the year began on Rosh Hashanah, and we measured the passage of time by Hanukkahs, Passovers, and the cycle of the moon. The Jewish calendar is lunar. In ancient Israel, the first of the month was announced when 2 witnesses sighted the new moon. Now we use a pre-calculated formula. Still, every first of the Hebrew month, there is no moon. On the 15th, it's full. It waxes and wanes, as do all things. 2 childhood memories come to mind. Chaim and I are sitting in our overgrown yard one afternoon, near the rusted skeleton of a swing set. A moon is already visible, even though it's afternoon. If the moon is made of cheese, can we cut it? My brother asks, probably serious. He's literal like that. For the moment, I let myself inhabit his world. If we can find a knife long enough, I answer. On another night, a huge and round moon hangs directly above the red Toyota, crouched in our driveway. I'm outside looking at it when I remember that I'm not supposed to do that. I'd learned that looking at the moon for too long was akin to idol worship. I was baffled by this teaching. I couldn't understand how something so comforting, so beautiful, that God himself had created and told us to bless and use to mark our calendars, why should we refrain from looking at it? Why were we always restraining ourselves? Why was everything a threat? Last week, my little brother became a rabbi, and me, I'm on a different path than the one we both expected I would be on. The moon that night was one of the moments along this path I'm on, one of the cracks. And now whenever I see it, it means both things to me, the tradition I love and the dogma I had to leave behind. In this world, sometimes I want to say in your world, the moon is not a symbol or a signpost, it's just a rock. I'm assuming it still orbits the Earth every night, but I haven't seen it in New York recently. Then again, I haven't looked.
Chava Gurari plans to make sure the moon is still in the sky tonight. For other moon fans, make sure to check out Saturday night's lunar eclipse.
You're listening to Uptown Radio.
There's more to come.
Stay with us.
We're back with Uptown Radio. I'm Charlotte Gibson.
And I'm Ariel Richin. Uptown Radio is online at uptownradio.org. You can also listen to us on air at WBAI-FM. Here's what's coming up in the second half of our show.
After a tragic terrorist attack in Kenya yesterday, the country is in shock. We talked with the journalists on the ground.
And here in New York, the city is struggling to get all students access to school libraries.
For the first time, people without an HBO subscription will be able to watch shows like next week's Game of Thrones premiere. Legally, that is.
All that and more to come. But first, this news.
I'm Dasha Lisitsina from Columbia Radio News. This afternoon, President Obama said he would help veterans get jobs and help the environment at the same time. He made this announcement at an Air Force base in Utah. A day after a deal was reached to limit Iran's nuclear weapons and lift sanctions, the framework of this deal is getting mixed responses. Cassandra Basler reports.
World leaders continue to react to Iran's nuclear agreement today. In a nationally televised address, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani praised the deal and promised to follow its terms. But while Iranians are celebrating the progress, the framework faces criticism from other sectors, including Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Such a deal does not block Iran's path to the bomb. Such a deal paves Iran's path to the bomb.
Israel argues that the deal does not go far enough in dismantling Iran's nuclear program, and skeptical members of U.S. Congress want time to comb through the details of the agreement. The Republican chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee plans to introduce a measure on April 14th. It would prevent Iran's sanctions relief for 60 days. President Obama says he may veto Congress's opposition to the agreement. Cassandra Basler, Columbia Radio News.
A man who spent nearly 3 decades on Alabama's death row was freed earlier today after prosecutors acknowledged that the only evidence they had against him couldn't prove Ray Hinton committed the crime.
They had every intention of executing me for something I didn't do.
He walked out of Jefferson County Jail in Birmingham this afternoon. A woman in Philadelphia was arrested on charges that she tried to join ISIS in Syria. This comes a day after 2 women in New York were charged with intending to stage a Boston Marathon-style bomb attack in the name of jihad. At least 147 people died when al-Shabaab militants stormed Garissa University in northeastern Kenya. Investigators continue to move bodies to the capital city, Nairobi, for identification. Information has come out that the Islamic terrorists appear to have planned extensively, targeting a site where Christians had gone to pray. In Yemen, a Saudi-led coalition trying to stop Shiite rebels airdropped weapons to fighters in the south, while al-Qaeda militants overtook a key military base in the east. 2 Saudi border guards were killed this afternoon. Wall Street is closed today for the Good Friday holiday. I'm Dasha Lisitsina from Columbia Radio News.
Gunmen from al-Shabaab, an al-Qaeda affiliate based in Somalia, killed 147 students at a university in Kenya yesterday. That's the group's deadliest attack in the East African country.
I spoke with Murite Mutiga, a freelance journalist for the New York Times who has been covering the attack's aftermath. We talked over a shaky Skype connection as he reported outside of a Nairobi hospital. I'm so sorry for what has happened. My condolences for your country's loss.
Thank you very much. We are all in shock.
So, Marita, you've been reporting out of Nairobi. Can you describe the scene there?
Today, it's really been a scene of real agony and tragedy for the parents of and relatives of a lot of the victims because they've been going through the very heart-wrenching process of identifying the bodies.
So what is the scene like in the hospital?
The hospital has been really busy, as you would expect. The town of Garissa is quite small, and so there was quite a struggle for the personnel to cope with the huge number of casualties.
And most of the victims are not Muslim. Can you explain why?
The Al-Shabaab militant group is an Islamist organization that seeks to impose Islamic law in the parts of Somalia where it's trying to gain control. Its members have very ostentatiously targeted Christians every time they have attacked in Kenya. So the primary victims of the attack certainly were young students who were identified as Christians.
Let's take a step back. Can you tell me more about Garissa University College? What kind of school is it, and why would it have been a target?
The problem is that because it's located not too far away from the border with Somalia, which is only about 90 miles from where the school was, it's quite easy for the Shabab to operate in this part of the country.
You mentioned Al-Shabaab. They also claimed responsibility for the Westgate Mall attack in 2013. They stormed Nairobi's biggest mall and killed 67 people. And this was over 4 days. This is the second major attack they've claimed responsibility for. What does What does it say about the Kenyan government's ability to stop these kind of attacks?
A lot of criticism is now coming in to the authorities in Nairobi for failing to do more to protect the students and to protect citizens more generally.
So regardless of religion, as a Kenyan, how does this make you feel?
As a Kenyan, obviously, this is really, really shocking. The death toll is absolutely staggering. Thoughts must also be put into how to stop this recurring and how to tackle what is clearly a major regional menace.
And after an attack like this, what does the future look like for Kenya?
Kenya is a bit of a strange country because you almost have two contrasting stories. You have a youthful population with a growing middle class, but then on the other hand, you have these extreme groups such as the Shabab, who essentially are trying to blast sections of the population back to the Middle Ages.
Marite Mutiga, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me during this difficult moment. Marite Mutiga went right back into the hospital after this interview.
The HBO TV series Game of Thrones will begin its 5th season next week. And this year, for the first time, viewers who do not subscribe to the network will be able to watch it online and on their mobile devices.
Distributors worry that services like this will lead more people to cancel their cable subscriptions. Hannah Klingberg reports.
HBO Now is starting as a partnership between HBO and Apple Computer, because for the first 3 months, it will only be accessible through an Apple device. It's for people like Ronnie Smith. She was a cord cutter. That's what the industry calls people who have canceled their cable subscriptions in favor of online streaming services. But she decided she couldn't do without HBO.
That's why I got cable. We were fine with what we had, Hulu and Netflix, Crackle, and all those other apps. And then we needed cable to watch Game of Thrones.
Smith and 18 million other people watched every episode of Game of Thrones last season. That includes 1.5 million who downloaded the show without HBO's permission. In the past, HBO hasn't launched a standalone streaming service because it wanted the average $16 a month viewers paid to subscribe and didn't think people would pay that much for a streaming service. The only way people like Smith could get HBO was through a bundle. That's what the cable companies call the hundreds of channels you get in basic cable so that you can get HBO. That bundle costs $90 a month on average. HBO's new streaming service is available for $15. If she gets it, Smith can cut the cord once more.
Sure. Is it available now? We'll do it.
But HBO Now will cost almost twice as much as Netflix and Hulu Plus, which are $8 each. Media analyst Bishop Cheen from market research firm SNL Kagan thinks the service won't cause more cord cutting, but not because of the price. He says there's something to be said for the paradox of choice. It's a psychological principle used by economists that says while people love having a lot of choices, at some point they have too many, like too many streaming services.
Even millennials discover, you know what? This is a lot of work. And I'm not getting all the stuff I really want. The prices are adding up.
I disagree with him that it's too much work.
Colin Dixon is a media analyst for InScreen Media. He thinks HBO Now will push more people to cut the cord.
Particularly for younger people, they're perfectly happy, and I frankly am perfectly happy managing, 10, 20 apps on my cell phone. You think I can't manage 10, 20 subscriptions with content providers?
This isn't just a different way of doing business for HBO. It's a different way of doing business for the cable companies, too. Professor Sam Craig of NYU's Business School says they aren't going anywhere because cable companies offer something consumers need.
And that's a broadband pipe into the home.
Cord cutters may not save as much as they hope because if cable providers no longer make money off television, they'll raise the price of broadband.
I think you already see that. If you look at the pricing, and increasingly we're going to see that as the landscape changes.
Craig says companies have to find ways to satisfy their customers and still make a profit.
It all goes back to what the consumer wants, and right now they want to consume their content when, where, how they want it, not have it dictated by.
HBO says the service will be ready in time for the season premiere of Game of Thrones on April 12th. Hannah Klingberg, Columbia Radio News.
For years, schools in New York State have failed to offer students adequate library resources. In 2003, a court of appeals ruled that the state must meet certain requirements to ensure all children have the opportunity for a sound basic education.
That means students must have access to up-to-date school libraries, certified librarians, and media specialists. As Teresa Avila reports, New York City is still struggling to comply, but some progress is underway.
At a middle school in Park Slope, Brooklyn, neatly organized bookshelves line the walls of the school library. It's a Thursday afternoon, and Jennifer Abinader, the school librarian, is showing me around the brightly lit room. It's lunch break, but about a dozen or so students fill the room. It's not long before one asks Abinader about a book. She doesn't know the title, but she remembers the cover.
A lady in a circle thingy, and the cover is green. And then it's one word title, and then
lady in a circle.
Yeah, like a crystal stuff.
In a crystal, matched.
Yeah.
Abinader recognizes the best-selling children's book.
Do you remember who the author is? Because I don't remember who the author is.
It's a girl.
It's a girl. Yeah, I know it's a girl.
After thinking for a moment, she realizes the book might have recently been checked out.
I'm sorry. I do not have the first one. If I find it.
But I needed this.
I know.
Abinader says she's constantly connecting children with books. That's the role of a librarian.
You think library and you think old woman, card catalog, quiet, someone shushing you, which I do a fair amount of.
She's been a librarian at MS 88 for 4 years, but she says her role is changing. For example, these days, she's helping children navigate good information from bad information on the web.
Rather than just being handed a piece of paper with all the information that they need on it, it's my goal to teach kids how to go out and find the information they need to solve a problem by themselves.
Librarians like Abinader are harder and harder to come across in New York City schools. Currently, 60% of schools in the city have no library staff at all. Some schools don't have libraries, or when they do, the facilities are sometimes ill-equipped. That's a state violation, says Joe Rogers, a senior researcher at Teachers College.
Well, the major problem here is that children's rights are being violated every day here in New York City.
Rogers says that's because of low budgets and lax enforcement of existing regulations. For example, some schools might opt to cut their librarians' salaries or pass on the librarians' duties to other teachers. That puts those kids in those schools at a disadvantage.
Librarians are able to help children develop and young people develop critical thinking skills through assessing information. These aren't skills that you're born with.
And that's an equity issue.
That's Gail Dickinson, former president of the American Association of School Librarians.
Those schools that eagerly seek school librarians, provide them for their students, are placing those children at a distinct advantage for college and career readiness than those schools who have that gaping hole.
Recently, the city has taken steps to find more librarians for its schools. To do that, it has partnered with the Palmer School of Library and Information Science. Current teachers will have the chance to earn the Master's in Library Science along with their school certification. The first cohort of 10 candidates begins classes this fall. Teresa Avila, Columbia Radio News.
New Yorkers have the longest work week because they have the longest commutes. On top of that, subway fares increased last week.
Cassandra Basler spoke to subway riders in the Outer Bronx. There, lower-income workers say service isn't increasing as fast as the fares.
It's 5:30 a.m. at the 2-5 train stop on East 180th Street, near the Bronx Zoo. Just up the road is a public development called the Lambert Houses. Here, commuters decked out in khaki slacks, construction boots, and white nursing sneakers are rushing to make the train to work on time. They're facing a long trip.
From my house to the train to my job, probably an hour.
It's about an hour to downtown Astor Place on the 6th train.
About an hour and a half.
That's Herbert Alvarado, Jorge Lopez, and Eugene Jackson. Their commutes are pretty typical, maybe even on the high side. A recent report says an average subway rider in the city spends more than 7 hours traveling to work each week. Adam Foreman is a researcher at the Center for Urban Futures, a policy group.
People with farther reaches of the outer boroughs often are lower income.
That means a lot of people at the 180th Street stop in the Bronx have some of the longest commutes on the tightest budgets.
There is a Manhattan-bound Express 5 train to Flatbush Avenue, Brooklyn College.
That's Eugene Jackson's train. He travels nearly an hour and a half to manage a Foot Locker in Brooklyn. And cost is a factor.
Majority of the times I get like $10 Metro cards.
But that's more expensive. Like a lot of hourly wage New Yorkers, Jackson has to spend more in the long run because he can't pay $116.50 up front for a monthly unlimited card. With the increased fare, that gets him to Brooklyn and back every workday. But Jackson spends almost an hour's wage on transportation. He's really not that concerned about the fare hike, but he'd like the extra funds to go toward improving service and reducing delays.
There's some mornings I've been waiting for the train for maybe 10, 15 minutes. And then other times I think I was waiting for the F train. It was like 45 minutes.
The next stop is 3rd Avenue, 140.
Stand clear of the closing doors, please.
Hector Alvarado catches the 5 train to a hospital in Midtown Manhattan, where he works as an X-ray technician. He says he still appreciates the New York subway.
I grew up in San Francisco, so comparing the fares to the way it is here in the city, we're very spoiled because we get a lot for that $2.75. Where other places, I know that you pay per stop, so the longer you go, the more you pay. So the fact that you can go from here to the end of the line for the same price, it's actually pretty affordable.
Alvarado says he'd live closer to work in Midtown if it fit his budget.
That would be ideal, or even having parking either more affordable or more accessible. That way, driving in would be perfect.
But since the weather's warming up, he's considering cheaper, faster means of transportation.
I'm going to start riding my bike, and it cuts down the commute to 35 minutes instead of an hour.
Jorge Lopez works at New York University caring for kids. He's standing at the platform with his son Jonas, who's ready to catch the train with his Spider-Man backpack.
I go to school at PS 93.
At 37, Lopez says he's been riding MTA since he was his son's age.
It's 27, 30 years of frustration, and we think things will get better, but they charge us more but don't increase anything for us.
He's right, the fare hike won't increase service, but it will help pay salaries for MTA workers. Neither Mayor Bill de Blasio nor Governor Andrew Cuomo have put up enough money to close the MTA's funding gap, or to relieve the frustrations of these 3 commuters. Cassandra Basler, Columbia Radio News.
Thousands of car lovers came out in droves today for the International New York Auto Show near Penn Station. Companies showed off their latest car models, many of which included environmental-friendly, electric, or hybrid cars.
Last year's sales were disappointing for electric cars. As Gregoire Moll reports, some of the car lovers at today's exhibition seemed pretty enthusiastic about going green.
In a booth close to a round-shaped car track, 4 companies are inviting people for a ride. BMW, Kia, Nissan and Ford are showing off with their latest models of electric cars.
That's where the battery is, under this mat right here.
Jeffrey Margolin is here with his grandson. He's a teenager but not old enough to drive. For his first time in an electric car, Margolin is checking out a BMW i3.
It's not quite a smart car, but it certainly looks like it's much more conducive to living in Manhattan as far as finding a parking spot.
A BMW employee takes Margolin and his grandson to the car. It seats 4 people. Margolin takes the front seat. While he drives, the BMW employee explains that even though this car is a BMW, it does not have a lot of features.
There's not many options just because the options add weight to the car. Yeah. So you can't get a sunroof because it adds weight. You can't get power seats because they add weight.
Got AC?
Yeah, it has full AC.
Electric cars dealers have been struggling. The stock of Tesla, a company that only sells electric vehicles, has been on a downward trend since last September. Sales of General Motors electric cars have been down by more than 15% last year. Matthew Negler teaches economics and business at the City College of New York. He says there are several reasons why electric car sales are down.
People who would be normally attracted to electric cars as an alternative to a traditional gasoline-powered car are not going to be as excited about that because gasoline prices have just been so low.
On top of that, there is still the issue of range anxiety, the fear to run out of power while driving.
You're going to have to consider, well, okay, so I'm not going to fill it up at the gas station. How am I going to go about powering a car? Do I need to plug it in? There's a whole bunch of new habits that need to be learned.
Negler is still optimistic, though. He says it's likely that electric cars will eventually become cheaper, and their battery life won't be a big issue very long, and people are going to start buying these cars.
And as those people start to adopt, more people are going to know people who have electric cars, and it's going to be easier for them to adopt electric cars. And pretty soon a point will be reached where there'll be a very rapid rate of uptake.
Going out of his electric car tour, Margolin has a big smile behind his thin gray beard.
For people living here in the city, as long as you don't have 5 kids, it's a great car. I would certainly consider purchasing something like this.
As long as he drives in the city, Margolin won't have to worry too much about range anxiety. Grégoire Moll, Columbia Radio News.
From Jerusalem to New York to New Delhi, Adelie Ponte reflects on her professional and spiritual journey over the past couple of years.
She remembers her last afternoon in Jerusalem.
I'm sitting on a bench on the roof of the Franciscan monastery. The sky above me is impossibly blue, and the sun shimmers on the cream-colored stones of the old city of Jerusalem. Almost all the buildings here are made of that stone, and the light is blinding. The massive gray dome of the Holy Sepulchre is so close it seems like I could extend my arm and touch it. Farther away, there is the golden glare of the Dome of the Rock, and right behind it, the Mount of Olives. I'm waiting for Brother David, a young friar and a friend of mine. But I'm uncomfortable, maybe even a little worried. Something weird is going on inside me, and I want him to diagnose it. It's a feeling of overwhelming quietness. A general calm has ruled over the nagging uneasiness and worry that I thought defined me. It's happened several times in the last few months. Oh no, I couldn't be another one of those stories. I went to the Holy Land and I found God. Well, I had moved to Jerusalem in September 2014, a staunch atheist and the daughter of the almighty French secularism. I had been bottle-fed with Enlightenment philosophers and postmodern skepticism. For me, Jerusalem was at the heart of a geopolitical conflict. If anything, religion was good for tourism. But purely by accident, I got an internship at a religious magazine published by the Franciscans. That's how I ended up on the roof with Brother David. A few days later, I was on the plane back to France. Back home, I wasn't sure of what I had experienced. It all seemed to dissolve away on the rainy streets of Paris. Only the memory remained. I couldn't explain why, but it felt important. And I was craving for that feeling to come back. Fast forward to March 2015, I was on another plane, which this time was taking me from New York to New Delhi on a trip for my journalism class covering religion. 4 days in, we were in the holy city of Amritsar. We had been walking through the white marble buildings all through the hot morning when we finally sat down. Before me was the shiny surface of the gigantic pool of holy water. In the very center, the glimmering golden temple. And there again, I felt it, this peaceful resting place within me. I had been chasing it for months, in churches and synagogues and yoga and running. It's like I could feel the holiness of the place. So what? Have I turned religious? No way. I don't know. Maybe I've just reached some kind of 25-year-old wisdom and I'm at a better place with myself. That's one possible diagnosis. Or maybe I'm more open to those doubts about my atheism. Or I just become weird on hot days and around white stones and golden buildings where there is a lot of reflected light.
Adelie Ponte is knocking on all doors this weekend, celebrating Passover and Easter.
Many people will be going to church this Sunday. Easter is often an excuse to devour chocolate and hunt for eggs.
New Yorkers can also try the extreme version of the Easter egg hunt. Camille Von Cannell went to the Lower East Side.
Away from the rain at the Clemente Cultural Center, there's a crowd of people of all ages wearing bunny ears with flashing lights. A psychotic bunny who calls himself Peter Rottentail is entertaining them. The carnival veteran starts hammering a nail up his nose.
You want me to pull it?
Yes, I do.
Oh, God. You have some problem.
Aaron Brockow is nearby with his two sons, Ezekiel and Jack. He isn't sure this is entirely child appropriate.
We'll see. I'm sure my kids will have a blast.
What are you guys looking forward to?
I'm looking forward to I don't know, completing like the bunny thing or whatever.
The bunny thing is Full Bunny Contact, the headline event. In a metal cage, teams of two have 40 seconds to grab as many plastic Easter eggs as they can while they wrestle with actors dressed in bunny costumes. Dan DeMello put on the show.
It's basically like Easter on steroids. It's just a beefed up version of the magic we all used to experience as kids.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to introduce tonight's Bunnies and Chickens.
The bunnies have all their own different personas. There's White Lightning, who's just extremely arrogant and competitive.
Half lizard, half bunny. Give it up.
He was playing in a nuclear waste facility and kind of evolved.
It's now time to choose your sides. Will you root for bunny or will you root for human? Begin!
Chris Dudko and his son Oliver are scrambling to pick up the colorful plastic eggs. The lizard bunny has a friend in the cage with him. They're trying to block the Dudkos, shoving them away from the eggs and swatting at their hands.
How was that?
A little exhausting.
It was pretty hard for them because they had to lean down because I was so small.
The activities will continue on Suffolk just north of Delancey Street until Sunday. General admission is $10, and for another $10, visitors can get inside the cage. Camille Von Cannell, Columbia Radio News.
That does it for this edition of Uptown Radio. Thanks for listening.
Tyler Daniels led the troops as executive producer this week. Senior producer Nardos Mesmer fine-tuned our sound.
Joe Sykes directed the studio battalion with Paula Lem and Alice Gadna.
Senior editor Adelie Ponte and Ariana Skybell whipped our scripts into shape.
Hannah Klingberg got us online and into the 21st century.
Special thanks to our commanders-in-chief, Danielle Alarcon,
John Dingus,
Carrie Donahue,
and Rick Carr.
I'm Charlotte Gibson.
And I'm Ariel Richin. Uptown Radio is live on Fridays at 4 p.m. and on WBAI Mondays at 5 a.m. You can download our podcast and find us online at uptownradio.org. Happy holidays, folks.